WESTPAC, the bank, has agreed to pay a record fine, an unbelievable amount, $1.3 billion. That's for breaking money laundering laws, for not properly reporting more than 19 million international transactions. Some of those payments were linked to child exploitation, child abuse, Philippines, that kind of thing. Terrible stuff, but $3 billion. Joining me is Australia's top finance writer, Terry McCrann of the Herald Sun. Terry, $1.3 billion, a fine. Is that fair enough?
Pretty much it is fair enough, Andrew. It was also entirely expected after the Commonwealth Bank settled its problems in the space for $700 million. Now, Westpac the sins of Westpac are greater. Commonwealth Bank basically stuffed up the way it ran its ATMs. It's the cash payments through its ATMs. It stuffed up in a way that was beyond understanding, but it did. Westpac came much more closer to actually facilitating money laundering, primarily in the context of 262 customers who all had suspicious transactions which are normally associated with international child exploitation. This is sending money from Australia to overseas destinations like the Philippines in particular. So this was much closer to what these money laundering laws are supposed to stop, these sorts of inappropriate and totally unacceptable payments. So Westpac was always going to pay more. Now, having said that, Andrew, I think we ought to recognise two things. One is that it's as much a fault of the regulator, AUSTRAC, as it is in the case of Westpac and the CBA. I mean, Westpac and the CBA had their stuff-ups, but where was AUSTRAC? It's supposed to be monitoring these transactions. It's supposed to be monitoring what's happening. And Westpac's failings went over 5 years. And at the end of that period, it was Westpac that uncovered its own problems and self-reported to AUSTRAC. So, Westpac is a failure, but also the regulator was a failure. Yet it gets to look like a hero by pocketing $2 billion on behalf of the taxpayer.
Here's the thing about the size of the fine. Sort of facilitating child abuse, whether knowingly or recklessly, whatever, is a horrible thing. I would have preferred to see people let off in handcuffs and jailed. I mean, we're handcuffing grandmothers in the sun in Victoria. Why not a banker, who's helped facilitate child exploitation? But the fine will actually inevitably be paid for by customers, won't it?
Well, it'll be paid for in a funny way by both customers and the shareholders. I mean, they can't just apply a 10-cent a transaction AUSTRAC payment to all their transactions with their customers. They wouldn't, and obviously that would be outrageous if they tried to do that. So some of the money will come from shareholders, and I think some of the money will come from customers. But I don't think it would have been appropriate for anyone to be led away from in handcuffs, Andrew, because another thing, the important thing to understand about this is that Westpac and the Commonwealth Bank, they didn't set out to build a franchise of money laundering. Hey guys, we hang up a shingle, we will help you launder your drug money, or we will help you launder your payments that you want to make to child abusers in international locations. It was essentially a stuff-up. I mean, they didn't do what they should have done in terms of monitoring their clients, monitoring the transactions, but they didn't really set out to facilitate money laundering in the way that some international banks have done and have done over the years and are continuing to do right now.
I tell you what, though, the sight of a banking boss in handcuffs would have a very salutary effect. I don't think they'll be doing that again in a hurry.
Do we have enough handcuffs, Andrew? Do we have enough handcuffs?
Terry, Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer, we've got the federal budget in just 2 weeks. He's today suggested he will be spending more on stimulating the economy for, who knows, maybe Westpac's $1.3 billion will help there. He's going to stimulate the economy, not save it. Now, I wonder if that's the right thing to do, is stimulating all that this economy needs.
Well, I think he has to be sophisticated in the way he does it. and I think he will be. On the one hand, he's going to be stimulating by probably bringing forward the tax cuts, maybe trying to get a corporate tax cut through that hasn't been able to be achieved for bigger companies so far. But he's also going to be winding back the JobKeeper and the JobSeeker payments. So he's taking with one hand and giving with the other, because he needs to be much more focused on where that stimulus goes, and also obviously trying to directly build things, increase infrastructure spending. But to continue the JobKeeper payments and the JobSeeker payments at the very high levels they've been up to date would be counterproductive, because it would actually stop people getting back to work, particularly those on JobSeeker. So he has to be very sophisticated about the way he manages the combination.
I think that's right. When ripping the plaster off with the JobKeeper, JobSeeker in particular payments, is going to have to offer the social welfare lobby another, on the other hand, we've got this. Now, on last night's show, Terry, and you made your displeasure quite known to me in a series of texts, I talked to former Labor Communications Minister Stephen Conroy about the National Broadband Network. Now, when the Labor-Rudd government, with Conroy in it as Communications Minister, first came up with this idea, they wanted a fast broadband fibre system going to every home. The Liberals then came in, chopped it back to fibre running to the street and copper after that, much cheaper. Now the Morrison government changed of plan, says we're going to have $4.5 billion spent on extending the fibre network to every home that wants it. Now, Steve Conroy last night said this was a backflip and $20 billion would have been saved if the Liberals had stuck to his old plan, done it all right from the start. Is he right?
Well, Andrew, I know, Andrew, that Steve Conroy is one of the good guys in politics in Australia, but he's over-emotionally invested in the wonderful plan that he came up with Kevin Rudd on the back of the beer coaster, as we remember so vividly.
He denies that.
Well, he does deny it, but maybe not a beer coaster, but something close to it. Anyway, he's one of the good guys, but he's emotionally invested in the idea. That was the network that he proposed to build, that Kevin Rudd proposed to build, was a fantasy. The idea that if you want to assume that it could all have been done at the costs that they estimated right at the start in 2010 and on time, well, then you could say that he was right. If we could, invent a unicorn, great. You would actually be, who would not want fibre to every house, every business in the country? But if we continued with that plan, we would have found ourselves in 2020 precisely when we needed a pervasive network because of the lockdown, the national antivirus lockdown. We would have had a network that would have been about half built. You could not have laid all that fibre to everyone, setting aside the whole question of cost, in the time frame. And when the Liberal government came to power in 2013, they'd been trying to build the fibre network for 4 years. By that stage, only 70,000 premises were connected, less than 1% of all the premises in Australia. That took them 4 years to get to 70,000. The idea that they could have got to the whole 8-9 million of us by 2020 was a fantasy, setting aside the whole issue of cost. And this is not a backflip. This was envisaged exactly in what Malcolm Turnbull was proposing back in 2013, that you get a pervasive network, yes, in a sense, the second best network, but you get a pervasive network to everyone quickly. That generates revenue. The revenue can then pay for the upgrading as needed. And that's what the government is now doing. That's what the NBN is now doing. It's upgrading the network, and because it can afford to do so and it makes sense to do so.
Yes, I think the NBN boss said the other day, this is money that's been generated by the fact that they've actually got a network in place now, completed, and now they can start improving it. Terry McCrann, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.